Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're talking about the common mental health struggles of pregnancy and how to deal with them. My guest is Dr. Jenny Yip, a clinical psychologist and author of the book, Hello Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. Dr. Yip, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So, there are four basic mental health challenges, and many of us have heard of postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, which is very serious, even life-threatening. But you sort of focus on two other conditions that many of us haven't really heard about: postpartum anxiety and postpartum OCD, which you say is like postpartum anxiety, only about 100 times worse. Can you describe postpartum anxiety and postpartum OCD?
Yes, absolutely. So these are two common maternal mental health conditions that no one really talks about and OBGYNs don't really assess for. However, they're actually more common than postpartum depression, and they're constantly being misdiagnosed as postpartum depression. So for postpartum anxiety, this is when women feel like they're constantly worrying, they're ruminating about possible catastrophes. They might feel like a perfectionistic tendency to attend to their pregnancy or their newborn in every little detail that would protect the baby and the wellness of the mother herself. And you're just constantly feeling keyed up. You can't sleep. You might not be able to eat because you're constantly worrying, and the worrying doesn't really stop. And obviously, that would interfere with your functioning. However, postpartum OCD is like a completely different beast. It's postpartum anxiety times 100 because you're having intrusive thoughts of terrible consequences happening to your newborn. And the terrible consequences might not be ordinary fears that most new mothers would have, such as potential baby choking or SIDS. However, they're intrusive images, such as, well, what if I drown baby? What if baby suffocates accidentally or intentionally? What if I am changing baby's diaper and I look at his or her genitalia for a little too long, and that might mean I'm a pedophile. So these are intrusive thoughts that a woman does not want to have yet, just because you feel like something terrible about yourself, you feel guilt, you feel shame, it magnifies and gives power to the intrusive thoughts. And then what happens is, of course, it's going to create a lot of anxiety, and then we naturally don't enjoy anxiety and therefore want to do something about it. So in postpartum OCD, there's a lot of checking, there's a lot of reassurance seeking, there's a lot of mental, magical compulsions where you might have good numbers or bad numbers, or you might have superstitious routines that you engage in to ensure that the intrusive thoughts will not come true.
So what I found especially interesting is that you yourself have personal experience with postpartum OCD. Can you share a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, even though I'm a expert in the OCD and I've treated so many women going through postpartum anxiety and OCD, I never realized that I would suffer it myself. Even though OCD does run in my family and I've experienced it in my childhood, I was definitely not expecting it. And I did have the very similar symptoms that, are common for postpartum OCD, such as the cleanliness and the sanitization and checking on my babies. I have twin boys, by the way, to make sure that they were breathing. But my OCD was a little bit different, where my biggest fear was that I would treat one of the twins differently than the other. And in some random, spontaneous way, I would cause them damage to their emotional or mental health. And therefore, that was my intrusive fear, was me doing damage to my children because I treated them differently. And instead of sleeping at night, and especially with newborn twins, at nighttime, I would be ruminating about checking and make sure that I treated them exactly the same. I would be mentally sequencing the events of the day to make sure that they were treated in the same way, that I felt the same way about them, that the content of my thoughts about them were equal. Even breastfeeding was a whole chore in itself, where I had to make sure that I was breastfeeding them and they were getting equal amounts of milk. And I honestly don't know of any scientific method to do that. However, I thought I was measuring how much milk they were actually getting, and it was really, really rough for me the first few months postpartum.
Some of these new mothers today, I say this because the last time my youngest is 30, and today it's amazing how they worry. And I'm wondering, do they know that people who have postpartum OCD and postpartum anxiety, do they understand that their behavior is off the charts? I'm talking about, like, for example, I know a new mother who, when someone turned on her oven high and she smelled a little, she thought that the oven was somehow toxic and she needed to get the baby out of the house. Another new mother I know, there were painters painting the outside of the house, and she thought somehow that the paint fumes came through the window and were toxic to the baby, and literally made her husband and the baby go check into a hotel because she felt like the toxic fumes were getting in the house. And I mean, it goes on and on. I know a new mother who went to the doctor, who prescribed the little baby Pepsid because of acid reflux, and then she went online and started looking side effects and refused to give the medicine to her baby right after her doctor prescribed it because she was afraid of the side. I mean, these stories are endless. Do these mothers know they're behaving in an abnormal way?
Yes and no. I think during new motherhood, you're just so lacking mental bandwidth. You're lacking sleep. You're lacking so much of yourself and your resources, emotional, mental, physical resources, that you have a hard time making adequate decisions. And that's actually a fear, a common OCD fear, that the decisions that I make will have irreparable damage or negative consequence to my newborn. And then I will be the one who's responsible. However, as I point out in my book, we also have to realize that in today's world, motherhood is so much different than it was 20, 30 years ago, where we are held to the highest standard of expectations to be everywhere, to be everything, to do everything for our families, that all of the responsibilities are on ourselves, are on our shoulders. And therefore, we hold such high expectations of ourselves that we don't want to make any wrong decisions and cause, permanent damage to our family members. And because of that expectation, you have to realize that OCD will tackle whatever it is that you care about. So if you care about being the best mother as society expects us to, or if you care about the health and safety of your newborn, then OCD will tackle that. And even though it might be excessive, that, okay, we're going to check into a hotel. Yes, that does seem excessive. However, for a new mother who's lacking that mental bandwidth, that might make sense to her in the moment because it just feels too unsafe to stay in the house. And therefore, we must do something, or otherwise, these negative catastrophic consequences might occur. Even though there is some rationality around it, you do understand it, the behavior in itself could still be excessive. And I do want to point out, Lori, that there's a big misconception about postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis. And, a lot of women fear disclosing their intrusive thoughts because they fear they would be judged negatively. They fear that their babies will be taken away from them. And this has happened to some women, unfortunately, because of the lack of awareness, even within the medical and mental health community. However, postpartum psychosis occurs when a woman has thoughts that she believes are her own, and the thoughts are believable to the mother. On top of it, it aligns with her values. And with postpartum OCD, it's quite the opposite. You do not want to have the thoughts. You do not want to have the intrusive thoughts. You do not want to be responsible for potential harm to the newborn. And therefore, in psychobabble terms, we call this ego dystonic, which basically means that you don't really believe that the thoughts are true. And therefore, it is a very different condition between postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis.
This is a fascinating subject and so pertinent to so many people today. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Jenny Yip. The book is called Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with psychologist Dr. Jenny Yip, author of the book, Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. And we were talking about postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD. What causes these?
Well, I think a lot of people believe it's just hormones. And even though there is a relationship between the hormonal fluctuations that a woman goes through during the perinatal and postpartum period, that is just one part of the equation. And again, we have to realize that OCD occurs when you care about something tremendously and then you feel like you're not doing something correctly. So with OCD, it's you feel like everything has to be just right. And it tackles that. If you care about your newborn being helpless or dying of SIDS, then it will tackle that. And how we know that it's not just hormones is because men also suffer from postpartum OCD. And that is also not talked about, except there are fathers who do experience postpartum OCD, and we know that hormones don't affect them, and therefore it's not just the hormonal fluctuations. It is a lot more of you have to be predisposed with OCD. There's definitely that biological component. However, environmental stressors trigger OCD. So obviously pregnancy and the postpartum period is a huge stressor on both mothers and fathers. And remember, OCD tackles whatever you care about. And because you care about your newborn so much, it's going to be the first thing that your OCD will tackle. And I just want all mothers to realize just because you have intrusive thoughts of potential harm to your newborn, it doesn't mean you're a bad mother. We all have intrusive thoughts. The only reason why some women experience postpartum OCD, whereas other parents might have an intrusive thought and not really mind it, is because you're feeling guilt and shame for having the intrusive thoughts. And of course, anytime you're feeling guilt or shame, you're giving value and you're empowering the thoughts themselves.
When I'm around new mothers, I can't believe how obsessed they are with the internet. And this was not available when I had children, but it seems to me like that's a lot of it. They're constantly online researching and over-researching, and it just seems like that might be, am I right? Is that one of the causes?
Yes. The thing about OCD is anytime you engage in a compulsive behavior, so let me just explain. The intrusive thoughts are the obsessions. These are the images, the thoughts, the sensations that you get that you do not want and they don't feel good. They trigger a lot of anxiety, discomfort, shame, disgust, embarrassment. And then the compulsions are basically what you do with the intrusive thought to give you relief from the discomfort. So the compulsions can be anything from checking the internet, checking on your baby. It could be seeking reassurance from family members or friends. It could be you sanitizing and cleaning excessively. It could be you even avoiding your baby for fear of harming your baby if you're left alone with the child. And anytime you engage in a compulsive behavior, such as what you said, Lori, about checking the internet, you're reinforcing the whole OCD cycle. So the more you engage in compulsive behavior, the more power you're giving into the OCD cycle, and the less feedback, the less corrective feedback that you're getting, that the consequence or the intrusive thoughts don't really carry the weight or the value that you're giving it.
We're going to take another break and be right back with Dr. Jenny Yip. The book is called Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. When we come back, we're going to talk about how people can get help. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking to psychologist Dr. Jenny Yip, author of the book Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. Dr. Yip, now really the most important part, how can people get help for this?
First of all, it's really important to realize that the evidence-based treatment is called exposure and response prevention therapy, and it's a type of cognitive behavior therapy. However, it's very specific to OCD and anxiety disorders. So what does exposure therapy means? It basically just means that in a safe space, in a contained space, you are confronting your fears, you're confronting your intrusive thoughts, and you can confront them in vivo, which means just in real life, or you can confront them imaginally. So those are called imaginary exposures. However, when you confront your fears, whether they are fears of baby dropping or baby drowning, or even like spiders, what you're doing is, number one, you are getting corrective feedback that your intrusive thoughts are not as dangerous as the credence that you give it. Number two, you're getting also confidence that you can tolerate this discomfort without doing any compulsions. And then number three, because of the confidence that you gain, you're no longer avoiding your situational triggers or the fears, or sadly, even baby itself. So when you're not avoiding, then you're gaining confidence, you're gaining the corrective feedback. And the other part in the response prevention is that you are not engaging in the compulsive behaviors, because remember, the compulsive behaviors are the actions, whether they're physical actions or mental actions, that you engage in to get relief. Except every time you engage in a compulsion, you're only reinforcing OCD and the fear itself. So the response prevention part is teaching you how to not engage in the compulsions, how to do something else instead of engaging in compulsions to get your relief. So that is the evidence-based treatment. It's exposure and response prevention therapy.
Why do you find the term self-care somewhat problematic?
Yeah. You know, ERP, exposure and response prevention therapy, is the evidence-based treatment. However, my approach in my book is a very holistic approach for all mothers. And we have just so overused self-care because we believe that self-care is necessary. However, the term itself is problematic because it sounds like it's optional. And the truth is, if you have a vehicle, would you be maintaining it on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis? You have to go get gas for it. You might want to wash it. You definitely have to go and get, your routine maintenance every few months. So even with a vehicle, if you're not maintaining your vehicle, it will break down. And us as mothers, it's no different. We have to prioritize self-maintenance. We have to refuel our oxygen tank. We have to go in for service, whatever that means for you, every so often, because if you run out of fuel, this is where burnout occurs. This is where you'll break down. This is where a lot of mothers will experience rage, which we have not even talked about. And you have to remember, your family relies on you. And if you're no good, then you're kind of no good for your family either. So you have to prioritize self-maintenance and go get yourself refueled every so often, daily if possible, even if that means like giving yourself 5 minutes a day to sit with your cup of coffee or tea just to replenish your fuel tank.
Wise words. We're going to take one final break and be right back with Dr. Jenny Yip. The book is called Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with Dr. Jenny Yip about postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, and postpartum psychosis. Dr. Yip, how do people know, especially when we're talking about postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, which are fairly new, how do we know when a person needs professional help?
Anytime that you are feeling like you cannot function any longer, you are not connecting with baby, you're not bonding with your newborn, you feel like you're falling apart and you don't have the resources, it's important to, try to confide in a family member or a trusted friend. However, if it gets to that point where there's no other option for you, it's important to get help. And there are two resources that I would suggest, which is the International OCD Foundation, iocdf.org, as well as the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, ADAA.org, where there are therapist directories and you can research to find a professional expert who has helped women with postpartum perinatal anxiety and OCD.
Dr. Yip, aside from purchasing the book, how can people find out more information about you?
Well, I am starting my new Stressless Mama community, so you can definitely find information on me on dryip.com.
All right, thank you so much for being with us today. I feel like we only scratched the surface regarding this, but once again, the book is called Hello, Baby, Goodbye, Intrusive Thoughts. Thank you so much for the interview and also for your outstanding, excellent work.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm happy to be talking about this important topic.
And thanks to you for joining us for this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.